What if I told you that the same France that has systematically enslaved Africa through currency manipulation and colonial contracts just signed a debt relief of 87.7 million euro deal with Ghana? Before you celebrate, Professor PLO Lumumba reveals the shocking truth about France's stranglehold on Africa that will make you question everything about this generous agreement. Watch this video to the end, because what Professor Lumumba exposes about France's colonial blueprint will blow your mind and change how you see every debt relief announcement from European powers.
France is the worst of the colonizers from all objective assessments. Of course, Samora Moises Machel said it is wrong to categorize slave makers as one being better than the other. But permit me to say that they were the worst. Number one, unlike the British, who simply were interested in your resources and therefore engaged in what was called direct rule, the French wanted to assimilate you. So their policy was assimilation. They came to the colonies and they wanted to convert you into Frenchmen and French women. And in school parades in the colonized parts of the world by the French, like Senegal, like Mali, like Burkina Faso, which was then Upper Volta, like Togo and Benin and Suriname. During the parade in the morning, pupils used to recite our ancestors, the Gauls. A black pupil saying that their ancestors were the Gauls. They wanted you to speak French. And once they had picked a few of you and took them to the Sorbonne, you had to be a total Frenchman or a total Frenchwoman. They came to different parts of the world and they created what they call the Petit Paris. Abidjan is Petit Paris, the small Paris. And their colonies were actually called overseas territories, les territoires d'outre-mer. They called them overseas territories, being administered from the metropole. The French never intended to leave. They never intended to leave Suriname. They never intended to leave Vietnam. They never intended to leave Senegal or Mali or Guinea-Conakry. And they were vicious. They punished you. They humiliated you. They did not want you to speak your language. I do not know why they were that harsh. Perhaps it's because of their history. Remember, this is a country that had kings. This is a country that had Marie Antoinette. This is a country that had King Louis XVI, and there was a time, it is King Louis XIV, who at one time when he was asked, and what is the state? I think that is that experience. King Louis XIV, when they were controlling France, he was asked, and what is the state? He said, l'état, c'est moi. I am the state. And when later King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette came, the French were humiliated when the people asked, where we want bread, they say, why don't they eat cake? And I think that history, that pain, when they created the revolution, I think in 1789, and they created the revolution, France was humiliated during the war by the Germans, and when therefore they became colonialists, they were visiting this pain upon the world. And as early as 1958, as recently as 1958, when they recalled Charles de Gaulle to come and take over power in 1958. Remember when Charles de Gaulle came, this was a military general. This is the height of decolonization. He used military force in order to retain the French colonies. And the colonies is what made France what is. So that the France that you see now is a France that is built on the back of those colonies. They were harsh because their very survival depended on these colonies. And their harshness can be seen when on the eve of independence in African countries, they signed the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. The yes-no vote for French colonies to decide whether after so-called independence, they would retain connection and connectivity with Paris. They gave everybody the opportunity to vote yes or no, but they did not want you to vote no. So that when Guinea voted no under Ahmed Sékou Touré, when they were leaving, they destroyed everything that was capable of being destroyed. Modibo Keita, in what was then the French Sudan, now Mali, they destroyed everything. Algeria, the pogrom in Algeria, when they were leaving, then led by Ahmed Ben Bella, they destroyed everything. The other countries they continue to control. As we speak, the currencies of all former French colonies are still printed in France, CFA franc. Their cruelty, I think, comes out of a big psychological burden, which they visit, transfer of aggression. It is painful. You can see even as we speak during the coup d'etats in Africa, the arrogance. You tell a country which is equal in international law that we have accredited our ambassador, we do not care. France, the home of revolution, the home of coup d'etats at one time, can not recognize a revolution when it's taking place, and they say, accept our ambassador. We don't accept the revolution. That is France for you. Arrogance. The most arrogant of the colonial powers. You know, the history of France is the history of how the arrogant fall. If you allow me, the school bully who takes lunch from every little boy and little girl thinks that he is invincible. Then one day, the little boy says, today you are not taking my lunch. And what the little boy does is to hit you when you did not expect. And you find yourself on the ground and everybody is laughing at you. France did not see what is happening in West Africa coming. So they find themselves at a time when they are very weak economically, when at home the population of immigrants is growing bigger and bigger. You go to cities such as Marseille, you find Algerians, you find Moroccans, you find Senegalese, you find Guineans, you find Burkina, and things are not happening as they used to be then in the former colonies that you thought you are controlling. A breed of young men and women begin rising. They rise in Guinea-Conakry, and the first thing they do is they say, we abolish all the agreements that exist between us and France. They rise in Burkina Faso and they say the same thing. They rise in Mali and they say the same thing. They rise in Niger, which has been providing you with uranium. Now you can't take it. I think they cannot take it because they are losing food which has been inside of their mouth. And they do not know how to behave. As somebody once said, without Africa, there is no France. Without our former colonies, give France only 20 years, and it will be one of the poorest nations in the continent of Europe. And that is going to happen. And they are resisting because for them this is life and death. But the stars, which I can now perfectly read, are telling me that their goose is cooked, and very well cooked.
In his powerful analysis, Professor Lumumba declares, without Africa, there is no France. Without former colonies, give France only 20 years, and it will be one of the poorest nations in Europe. He reveals how France has been the worst of all colonizers, using a deliberate policy of assimilation to convert Africans into French men and women, forcing black pupils to recite Our Ancestors the Gauls during school parades across Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Togo, and Benin. The professor exposes France's sinister post-independence strategy through what he calls pacts for the continuation of colonization. Agreements that ensure former French colonies remain financially enslaved through the CFA franc system, where colonies had to keep 50% of their foreign currency reserves in the French treasury, plus an additional 20% for financial liabilities, leaving member states with only 30% of reserves within their borders. But here's where it gets interesting, and why Ghana's situation is particularly significant. Why does France agree on debt relief of 87.7 million euros for Ghana? Why did they agree to reduce Ghana's debt burden by cutting interest rates, extending repayment terms, and pausing debt payments? Why and why now? We about to reveal something shocking that others are afraid of. Let's start on the favor of Ghana. You see, on July 25th, 2025, Ghana made history by signing an €87.7 million debt relief deal with France, marking France as the first bilateral creditor to finalize a debt restructuring agreement with Ghana under the G20 Common Framework. This groundbreaking agreement represents a significant milestone in the West African nation's recovery from its 2022 default. The comprehensive deal reduces Ghana's debt burden through multiple mechanisms, cutting interest rates, extending repayment terms, and implementing strategic debt payment pauses. Ghana's finance minister, Dr. Kasiel Addo Forson, and France's William Ross finalized this historic agreement, which directly supports Ghana's ambitious $5.4 billion debt restructuring plan implemented after the country's 2022 default and ongoing $3 billion IMF program. France's backing demonstrates growing international confidence in Ghana's economic recovery trajectory. The numbers tell a remarkable story. Inflation has dramatically fallen from a crushing 54% to a manageable 13.7%, while foreign reserves have substantially improved, raising genuine hopes for long-term economic stability and growth. Ghana embarked on comprehensive restructuring of its sovereign debt in December 2022, with assessments showing the need for public debt to decline from nearly 90% of GDP to 55% of GDP. This French agreement represents the first concrete step toward achieving that ambitious target. Ghana now expects to negotiate similar deals with other major creditors, including China, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Discussions with private lenders continue as the nation works to finalize its comprehensive debt restructuring strategy. But here's what Professor Lumumba wants you to understand about France's true motivations and the deeper implications of such agreements. France's current desperation stems from their weakening grip on Africa. He observes that France finds itself economically vulnerable at home, with growing immigrant populations from Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, Guinea, and Burkina Faso in cities like Marseille, while simultaneously losing control over former colonies they thought they were controlling. The professor explains how a movement against the CFA franc, the French-backed currency of several African countries, is growing, spurred by leaders who see it as a vestige of colonialism. This is happening as a new breed of young African leaders rise in Guinea-Conakry, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, with their first action being to abolish all agreements existing between their countries and France. France is fighting so desperately to maintain control and not losing all now. Comment below. Do you think Ghana's debt relief deal with France is genuine assistance or another form of economic control? Would France later demand something in return for this? You remember how they stayed in control of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger? And wait, Professor Lumumba has warned on how they wants to eliminate IBRAHIM TRAORE.
And IBRAHIM Traore's administration presents a hope, presents in the view of particularly young Africans a light at the end of the tunnel. And what is that light saying? That light is saying, and it can be heard through the echo chambers, saying, you the colonizers, you the French, who in 1958 pretended to hand over political power, we no longer want to be with you. We no longer want to be your latter-day slaves. Traore is being heard as saying that. Traore is being heard as saying, you, the neo-colonizers who have given us the short hand of the stick, you reap where you have not sown. You take our uranium, you take our resources, you take our minerals, and you give us a pittance. You are not going to do it anymore. You, the colonizers who handed over to us systems of governance that cannot work, including electoral commissions, including printing ballots in your own countries, including printing paper currency in your own countries, We will not allow you. He is saying that. You, the colonizers, who, when we want to liberate ourselves, you create insurgency, you sow seeds of discord within our ranks, we are not going to allow you to do that. You, the African Union, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you ECOWAS, who ought to be protecting us as Africans, you too appear to be mere lapdogs of the international order, particularly the West. To the extent that he is saying that, he is striking the right chords of a dissatisfied, disillusioned people in the continent of Africa, and their wish and desire is that there is a new dawn. A new dawn where governance will be different. A new dawn where governance will be people-centered. A new dawn where the umbilical cord between the colonizer and the free peoples will be severed. That is what, in the minds of many, Ibrahim Traore represents. And that is his appeal. Remember, throughout history, people, and this is human, always want symbols of what they are fighting about. In the struggle for independence, if you look at other nations, in Ghana it was Nkrumah, in Tanzania it was Nyerere, in Zambia it was Kaunda, in Malawi it was Banda, in Mozambique it was Machel, Angola it was Neto. But this is now big because Traore has come at a time when there is what I call African Renaissance, and people want things that are pan-African to defy what happened in Berlin in 1884 and 1885. That is what is happening. He is that symbol. You know, in history, people emerge, or leadership emerges that is defined by environment. Upper Volta had been one of the French colonies that was seen to be wedded to the Paris government, almost in the class of La Côte d'Ivoire or Senegal at one time. When Thomas Sankara came and said, we've got to recognize ourselves, and started by changing the name of the country, that was unprecedented. It was only in Ghana that Nkrumah had changed the name of Gold Coast to Ghana. This was new, this was fresh. And Thomas Sankara then was seen in that mold. A servant leader who says, I do not want the trappings of power. I do not want long motorcades. I do not want security that is a mere display of power. I want to serve the people. I don't want to ride in Mercedes-Benz or Bentley or Cadillac. I want something that is functional, something that moves. And when Thomas Sankara appears in 1987 at the OAU meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and calls for our refusal to pay debts, he created a revolutionary fervor in Burkina Faso. And Traore is in that tradition. He was young then, but the stories must have been told to him of Thomas Sankara. And remember, they come out of the same environment, the military environment. They may have been trained after the style of the French, but sometimes you've got to swim in the oceans of the enemy in order to know who they are. So he grew in that environment, and when therefore he comes and says, we are leading, when he comes and says, we are not going to have the trappings of power to prevent us from working for the people, when he comes and says, my salary is not going to be increased, when he comes and says, I'm not going to be summoned to appear in European capitals, when he comes and says that the IMF and the World Bank are not going to dictate to us what to do, when he comes and says that the mineral companies of the West are not going to tell us what to do, we are going to choose our own friends in the international arena, he is speaking for many people in the continent of Africa. And that is why, for the moment, he remains in the minds and hearts of many people. And the prayer of many is that he does not change. because power has its own way of changing and corrupting people. The prayer of many who are watching him is that he remains on course, that he remains faithful to the agenda, that he remains faithful to his declared position that he is a people's servant, that he is a midwife to deliver for the people of Burkina Faso and to ensure that the quality of their lives is improved. For the moment, he is receiving the best judgment that a leader can expect. He can do no wrong in the minds of many. And the media and social media is populated with a lot of artificial intelligence things which are attributed to him. And they are all positive. That is a statement of the hunger that Africans have for positive messaging. It gives hope. It tells them that it can be done and that it must be done. So in the same way, for those who read the Bible, as Moses stood before his people and said, I'm going to part the Red Seas, Traore is expected to part Red Seas, almost to summon manna from heaven, almost to cause pillars of fire to stand between them and the neo-colonizers. The expectations are great. The situation as it is in the Sahel region must be understood at two levels. Level number one is that it has brought forth a new generation of leaders. And remember, it started in the year 2021 with the coup d'etat in Mali, when Atimi Goita overthrew the administration of Now. When he did that, the rebellion started, and immediately after that, there was the Burkina Faso coup in 2022, and immediately after that, in 2023, there was the coup in Niger. And immediately after that, you saw that they were expelled, and the three countries have moved out of the economic community of West African states and created their own one in the Sahel. And remember that that region is also infested by insurgencies who we think are also manufactured by the former colonizer France. Remember that that region has said we are having one currency. Remember they've said that we are allowing free movement of people. Remember that they are removing tariff and non-tariff barriers. Remember that the French have also ensured that their kin and kith in the West are hostile to those administrations, and of course by extension hostile to Burkina Faso. Remember that they were exploiting the uranium. Remember they were exploiting their minerals. Remember that they saw these as satellite states, and it is for that reason why Russia became attractive as a trusted ally. And many in the West sometimes don't understand why Russia is attractive as an alternative to the Western countries. The history is long, but let us cut it short. Russia was not a colonizer, despite attempts by some Western historians to say that they attempted to colonize in Africa. They did not. So there is no colony of Russia. And even when the Soviet Union existed prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, and we use the word Russia as if it was the same as the Soviet Union. At least that is what happened in many parts of Africa. And what did they do? They were seen in the early days to be positive supporters of African initiatives. In Egypt, during the administration of Gamal Abdel Nasser, when the West had refused to build the Aswan High Dam, it is the Russians who came. In Ghana, the Russians were friendly to Kwame Nkrumah, of course, then a Soviet Union. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, when the UN had refused and or failed to come in aid of Patrice Emery Lumumba, it is the Russians who are called, and then Lumumba was called a communist. So the Russians were also present in Angola to support NATO. They were present in Mozambique to support Mondlane and Machel. They were present in Zimbabwe to support Nkomo and Mugabe. They were present to support the African National Congress in South Africa. Their presence in Africa has been seen as positive, and they have been seen as a friend who does not want to humiliate and dominate They may have their interest in having minerals, they may have their interest, as indeed every country does, but they are people you can call friends, not fair weather friends. And it is in that context that then they become a natural choice for two reasons. One, historical. Secondly, because they have the military wherewithal. Remember that this world is the law of the jungle. And if you have a friend who is feared by your enemy, then that does guarantee your security. And it's that context, therefore, that you see Russia have become in many ways the protectors of this administration at the request of the administration. Because if it were not so, history tells us that you can be eliminated. And we have had many rumors of attempts at the life of IBRAHIM TRAORE. And these colonizers, they don't do so directly. They use your very own. They create fifth columnists within your very own system. And if you had any doubt, how did they eliminate Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara? Through the people that he thought were his friends. In Kiswahili we say, kikulacho kingoni mwako. That which bites you is inside the clothes that you wear. And that is why you need friends who will stand by you, come rain or shine. And for the moment, the Russians have demonstrated that they are such friends. When one talks about friendship, particularly in this harsh world where in truth it can be said there is a new scramble for Africa, in this harsh world where the European powers, former colonizers, are losing their territory and influence one by one, in this harsh world where the Western countries, the conceptual West, believe that they are losing their territories to Russia and China, to be a friend of Russia is to invite enemies from the West. And that is why you see, using even African institutions, they threaten Burkina Faso, they threaten Mali, they threaten Niger. Using different methods, they try to ensure that they drain water out of your pond so that you cannot survive. So in the short to medium term, it is going to be a difficult time. Difficult because they'll try to choke you. They'll try to ensure that they create an environment where your people rise up against you. They'll try to ensure that there is dissatisfaction. So going forward, what I would myself suggest is that the engagement be structured and be beyond human beings. Human beings can only exist for so long. But in order to ensure that friendship is guaranteed, the friendship between Burkina Faso and Russia must look beyond Traore and beyond Putin. And that can be done by ensuring that the engagements are of mutual strategic interest for the countries, so that if it is in agriculture, if it is in the mining sector, if it is in tourism, if it is the military, then those structures are put in place, and 100 years from today, holding all factors constant, they can survive those who entered into them as agreements. You know, when Traore came to power, and let us retrace the history again, that he came to power after Compaoré had been removed and had sought asylum outside of the country, I think in La Côte d'Ivoire. He came to power after Jean-Marc Christian Kabore's administration had been taken away. He came to power after Damiba had been taken away. And when he came and he appeared to be relieving and reviving what I call the Sankaraist philosophy, he became an immediate enemy of Paris, led by Macron. And Macron, you see, has carried himself almost as the latter-day Napoleon Bonaparte. To the extent that he has done so, anybody who is not towing the line, Macron, I think, sees himself, and this is subject to debate, not only as Napoleon Bonaparte, but also as Charles de Gaulle. And in that regard, he believes that the territories which were colonized by them must behave. Remember in 1958, after the yes-no vote, in which case only Sékou Touré of Guinea voted no, they used to refer to former French colonies as territoire de haute mer. These are our foreign territories in the distant land. So when you break loose, as Burkina did, says, what is happening here? Who do they think they are? Do they think they can withstand France? So it is personal anger. It is ego that has been hurt, and that can be dangerous. Hence, the reaction that you see from Paris. In other words, from the standpoint of Paris, Ibrahim Traore and his compatriots are giving a bad example to otherwise good boys and girls. When you look at Traore and Burkina Faso now, I think there are four categories of people when you look at how they are dealing with the Traore. There is category number one of leaders who are wedded to their colonizers, who think, oh, this young man, we've seen many like him, he's just a flash in the pan, he'll come and go. That is category number one. And I'm sure they tell their masters in the West, we have seen many, didn't we see Sankara, didn't we see Lumumba, didn't we see Nkrumah, didn't we see Machel? Category number one. Category number two are those who are saying, I wish it was me who was getting this kind of adulation. What could I have done in order to ensure that my name is emblazoned on every other media? Those are actuated by ego and malice and envy and jealousy. That is another category of African leaders. The other category of African leaders are those who fear. They fear that what this young man and his compatriots are doing is setting a bad example, and I must now look very keenly at what my young men and women in the army are doing. They can't sleep because they fear that they themselves can meet the fate of those who are removed by Traore. So they fear in that regard. Then there is the fourth positive category. They are few and far between. They are the ones who say, yes, these things we call unconstitutional changes of power. This is not unconstitutional change of power. This is rebellion, and not just rebellion. This is revolution. And they are saying, let us not ostracize these young men and women. They actually represent a new generation of Africans who are impatient, who feel let down. Let us support them. One of them who is emerging in that category is my very good friend, John Dramani Mahama of Ghana, who upon returning to power in Ghana, told the ECOWAS leaders, we must engage the Sahelians. And he's been to Ouagadougou, he's been to Bamako, he's been to Niamey. They are saying that this situation is a clarion call to the entire continent of Africa, that if we don't change for the better, then we will be eliminated. So when you look at the situation in Burkina Faso, those are the four forces that are operating within the African continent. Then there is a fifth force from outside of the continent. This is France. These young people are making us to lose our spheres of influence. They think they are going to make something to work in Burkina Faso. We will not allow it. What we are going to do is to cause and support insurgency, so that if there is no total breakdown of law and order in those countries, then there will be a civil war. And I can tell you, they are doing everything in their power, covertly and overtly, to undermine those administrations. And I have no doubt in my mind that on a daily basis, They have individuals in their intelligence community asking, how can we eliminate him? Can we eliminate him by poisoning his toothpaste like we tried before with other people? What do we use on a daily basis? They are planning.
Africans must wake up and stand tall for protection. Share, subscribe, and hit the bell for more hidden truth that mainstream media won't tell you.